Right. Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for being here for the Greater Lowell listening session on behalf of the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. It is our pleasure to see a full room here today of folks here to listen and to learn around fair housing. And we are really just delighted to have you here on behalf of the Healy Driscoll administration, Secretary Ed Augustus. Want to extend our appreciation for you being here and for allowing us to be in community with you all here on today. We are going to have a robust agenda here. We'll be hearing from some of our co-hosts that helped make this session happen. Want to give a huge shout out to Community Teamwork and Northern Middlesex County of Governments. If you give them a round of applause for their partnership in helping to make this session happen. And even more so, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce the CEO of UTech that helped make this event happen and gave us this beautiful space that we find ourselves in, that are doing amazing work in the community. Excited and thankful to be in partnership with you all, and I wanted to hand it over to Greg Crittone.
Thank you, Whitney. It's nice to see everybody. I'll be really brief. I want to echo our appreciation to you, Whitney, and to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. It's great that they're going out into the community, right? Literally to make sure. They were here a couple of years ago. We know things change, and it's so important to make sure we're getting feedback. And so I want to shout them out, and let's give them a round of applause as well. So I'm the CEO of UTech. If you haven't been to UTech before, just so you know, we serve young adults ages 18 to 25-year-olds. We serve young adults that are caught up in the criminal justice system, maybe gang involvement, and this is their place. We'll do work in the correctional facilities. We'll do work on the streets, right? We'll make sure our street workers who do a lot of the peacemaking work are engaging young people. And then when it's time for them to enter in the building, it's all about their education, their employment journey. And I think everyone knows one of the biggest challenges, and particularly for young adults coming out of incarceration, when we talk to young adults, the number one thing is housing. I was walking up, and I was about to, go in the hallway, and one of the young adults came to me and said, "Yo, Greg, what's up with all the housing people here?" He's like, "Gonna go hook me up with housing, right?" I'm like, "I'm not sure if that's on the agenda, but what's on the agenda is to continue the work." And I say that to say that the work that everyone's doing here is so important, right? I know for the young adults we work with and so many individuals here in the city of Lowell. And we have, representatives here. In a second, you'll be hearing from the mayor. And we're really fortunate. CTI has been doing this work for decades. And I just want to thank Carl and all your team for doing all this work. We've learned from you a lot along the way. For us, it's making sure that young adults, we can remove any barriers. And housing is one of the biggest barriers that our young adults face. And a lot of times, the individuals who are coming out of incarceration too often are not seen or not heard, right? And the barriers may not be seen or heard. But this executive office, and thanks to the secretary, recently, 3 years ago, dedicated funding specifically for individuals coming out of incarceration. And it's allowed us to do work where we're working with landlords, and making sure, even on a small level, to begin that work. And I think we all know, whatever we're doing, there's still more. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of UTech for coming here. Thank you to the executive office, to the secretary, and it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, our newest mayor, someone that we've known for many, many years, who's been a huge ally, a huge voice for young adults here in Lowell, Mayor Gitcher.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the City of Lowell and this regional housing listening session. I want to start by thanking the elected officials who are here, my colleague, Councilor Duran, who's a big proponent for housing, fair housing. I just want everyone to recognize Councilor Belinda Duran. We can't do what we do in this city without our representatives, so I just want to take the moment and also recognize our representatives. Representative Elliott, he's here today. Representative Howard's here today. And Representative Hung couldn't be here today, but he also sent his staff assistant, Michelle, so they're all here today. Thank you. On behalf of the City Council and the City Manager Golden's office, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today for the Greater Lowell Regional Fair Housing Listening Session. You know, it was just a few short days ago, last Thursday, I had the opportunity with some of my colleagues from the City Council to attend the State of the State for the governor. And a major priority is the housing. We all know that. And we want to make sure that we are all listening well in trying to make it affordable. And we also want to make sure that it's equitable, and we want to make sure that people are treated equally. And I think that that's the challenge in our community right now. And as we look around the next day, a lot of us that represent you on the local government end stayed for the Mass Municipal Association seminars. And of course, we chose the ones on housing because Lowell is in a growth spurt right now. We're looking for the front-runner city to produce funding that will help us grow in the housing aspect, but also on the business side so that we can maintain some of the funding sources that will help people afford the housing at the same time. And we had a phenomenal few days down there, but everyone echoed the same challenges. The federal government changes that are so rapid and they're so moving, and it's a moving target that you really can't hit or adjust to in real time. It sounds like you can, you know, to the average person, but all of you know because you work within it or you know somebody within it that has these challenges, and we need to do better. We need to find a way to lock down those fundings so they get to the lowest hanging fruits in our community and make it really stick and work so that, you know, everybody has an opportunity to housing in our community. And those sessions taught us a lot of lessons about what all of you do. You know, I've worked in government for 36 years, and the biggest challenge between government is knowing its community, and its community actually working with government. Because a government agency that just works alone really never produces anything. You look at some of the higher producing communities around us, and they all have one thing in common. They rely on the community to work with the government, not the government to demand to the community, which there's a backwards push that way that we see sometimes in Lowell where we just don't communicate well. And I think over the last few years, we've seen that communication get much better with all of you involved. And I think if we can continue down that path, we're going to see some amazing things that we've seen already, and it's only going to grow better. And I do thank all of you for all of your investment into the Fair Housing Listening Session, because that's the important piece, is talking across government and making government listen and understand you are the people who run the government. We just push forward your policies and make sure that they work. And that comes from the neighborhoods down. And I think when we look at our new system with the district counselors, it has changed a lot. And you hear it a lot more that actually gets into the community better, in my opinion. Again, I'm biased to the system, but it is our opinion. I want to thank the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities for reaching out to us. I think it's important that they reach out to us and have these listening sessions. Under Secretary Augustus's leadership, it is clear his office will hold people accountable and will push back into the communities and help you define where we're going. Secretary Augustus brings real-life experience. I know he couldn't be here today, but I just want to make sure we recognize who the driver is behind the initiatives that are going to come forward to our local community. Secretary Augustus has real home experience. He was a school committee member first. He moved on to become a city manager for 8 years in Worcester, a real inner city, where he developed housing programs that actually worked for Worcester and took people into the fair and affordable housing era. And I think that that's what he's trying to transition into on the state level for all of us within our communities. He's worked at the State House as a senator. I think that that's another important piece, being able to tie the local community back into how the Senate and judicial operate together, the government actually operates. I think it's important to watch people walk through and make it happen for all of us. And he brings real life experience. I think that that's what his staff does extremely well, and we thank him. If you could just pass along our thanks for that, and also Whitney for all of your hard work. I think it's important that we do recognize the people who do the groundwork and bring the money to all of us and all the resources that we need. I want to also thank the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. Jenny Raitt, I want to thank you for your hard work. I met with you the other day. I know that we have a common ground, and we're going to try to work together and try to figure out how we can best utilize the government and your agency. And your agency has been extremely amazing to me. I was impressed by our meeting, and I look forward to many more meetings going forward. Thank you again. Community teamwork, Kyle Howell. Yesterday, I was so impressed. I was listening to that whole seminar, the webinar that we had yesterday, and the way that they communicate, the way that they push equity and accountability in government is second to none. You could tell they come from the inner city, and they're pushing for inner city justice for people and pushing the housing piece. And I thank you every day for what you do for everyone in our city and our community. Thank you, Kyle. I want to also thank Greg and UTEC for allowing us to be here. And when you start looking at UTEC and what they do for our community, it's amazing. 18 to 25-year-olds. It's not easy for them to get anybody to give them the resources. Everybody pushes for people till they get through high school, and then it seems like people are left on their own because they know everything going through, because we have all these standardized tests and everybody gets through. But when you see reality is Greg's day-to-day job, and I can't thank Greg enough and his staff, and keep pushing, because you're definitely making a difference in our community. This listening session is an important opportunity to hear directly from residents, advocates, and the community stakeholders about their experience and the barriers they continue to face in accessing fair and equitable housing. Fair housing is more than a policy. It's about ensuring dignity, opportunity, and inclusion for every person who calls our community home. And I think we have to let that hit home. That's not always the case from everyone around us. We have to think about that. How do we produce people who are going to come back into our community and work hard? And I think that we have an obligation as a society to help others. And that's a path that this council is determined to do, and the last council was determined to do. And I thank my colleagues, and I know Belinda shares those sentiments with everybody in here, because we've had many conversations on this prior to her being elected as a city councilor. There is no more diligent person than Belinda Duran in this, and she's definitely a fighter for our affordable housing. The Affordable Housing Act and the establishment of the Office of Fair Housing marks significant progress in the Commonwealth's efforts to address housing inequities and combat discrimination. These initiatives reflect a strong commitment to advancing policies, enforcement, and education that foster greater access and safe, affordable housing for all. Lowell is a city built on diversity, resilience, and collaboration. We are proud to be part of this statewide effort to listen, learn, and help shape solutions that reflect the real experiences of our residents and strengthen our neighborhoods. Real experiences in our neighborhoods. And we all know what that means. It doesn't have to be really explained to all of us in this room. Thank you for being here, for sharing your voices, and for continuing to this important work. I look forward to the dialogue between all of us ahead in continuing our shared commitment to our city and ensuring that everyone has access to safe, fair, and affordable housing. I thank you and welcome you all to today's listening session.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Give him another round of applause for his great leadership. Excited for the work ahead. And to his point, we want to be about community, right? Why we're doing these listening sessions is, and as the secretary often says, we lead first in our leadership with listening first, right? And so that is our goal, to help us to shape this new Office of Fair Housing, to help shape those priorities. And to the mayor's point, think about fair housing in terms of the law, but also in terms of dignity, opportunity, inclusion, as the mayor just said. So thank you so much for your remarks, and I'll be sure to share and uplift those notes to the secretary. And in some ways, I feel your trajectory as well, similar to his, right? Finding yourselves in all of these roles in government, but also now sort of in your goal around serving the public. So appreciate your work, and I'm excited for the work ahead. That being said, I have the great opportunity now to introduce one of our co-hosts that helped make this session possible, that helped us do the outreach, the many meetings, representing the organization, community teamwork, and please join me in welcoming up Carl Howard, CEO.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As Greg said, community teamwork, we've been doing housing and providing assistance to the community for decades, over 60 years in the community. And for the last 16 of those years, I've been really working in various housing programs for the agency before I transitioned to this role as CEO over a year ago. And one of the things that always kept coming up when our family advocates are searching for housing opportunities for our families that are experiencing homelessness, or those that are coming through our resource center looking for housing, is the, I guess, anecdotal experiences of classism, racism, stigmas, and housing discrimination as they're looking for housing. We administer over 4,000 vouchers across the Commonwealth. At any given point in time, we have over 120 families in family shelter, and we currently have over 60 individuals in our individual shelters. And that's not to mention the 6,000 individuals that walk through our resource center every year. The number one request is housing, as kind of Greg said. Like housing is the number one challenge. And unfortunately, when people are looking for housing, and they say they have a voucher, or they say they have home base, or they're receiving raft assistance, or they have accessibility needs. Property owners, landlords, there tends to be some stigmas that come along with that around who those individuals are, what those families look like, and oftentimes they find reasons to discredit them or discount them from the housing, which makes it really difficult. And when we hear these stories that are coming to our staff on a weekly basis, the legalities, the applications, these individuals, these households do not have the time to fight these battles in court. They need housing, and so oftentimes they just move on to the next, and they just keep hitting walls. And that's a huge barrier for those individuals that are housing insecure, as well as the staff who are continuing to try to advocate to give these families, these individuals, a chance. And so about 10 years ago, we were like, how do we support these households? Like, how do we go through the process? And started working with the city, started working with Northeast Legal Aid. Like, what is the process? Who's kind of taking the lead on fair housing in this community? And the reality was there wasn't anyone. So there was a report in 2010 that the city did on fair housing, and it was a glowing report. It was a self-audit, and the report stated that there's no occurrences of discrimination happening in the city, that there's no reports. And then in the summary says, however, there is no mechanism to even report their experience of discrimination. And so, and in the bottom line of the report was, we can't really say if discrimination is happening or not happening because there's not a mechanism to even report that there's discrimination happening. And so I think that's when CTI took it upon ourselves to figure out, well, how do we get funding? How do we stand up a program that can be that ear, that can report these and help people navigate a very complicated system? And we worked with the city, we worked with the state, and we also worked with the federal government on applying for various grants. And roughly 5 years ago, Aaron, is that it, right, 5 years ago? We were awarded some state funding as well as some federal funding to stand up this program. And since we did that, the phones have been ringing, people are coming through, and And it just really shows that there was a huge need in this community. I can't speak more highly of the work that Aaron Ginsberg, our manager of Fair Housing Program, has done to grow this program from just himself to now a team of advocates that really help the community and those gain access to supports to navigate the legalities. And we're continuing to grow this program. And so we are committed to ensuring that every person, whether it's whatever their housing challenges are, that they have, as the mayor said, accessible, equitable access to housing and affordable housing. And so I'm really happy that we're all here today. I'm excited that the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities is having these listening sessions across the state to really learn what the challenges are and how they can stand up additional supports for our residents to gain access to affordable housing in the state of Massachusetts. But without further ado, I'd like to turn it back over to Whitney. I really appreciate your time, and please use this opportunity to speak your truth and your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for your work and your leadership, and for meeting the gaps, right? Meeting the gaps, creating that mechanism to address fair housing, and the great work that's come out of that. We'll hear a little bit more about that work from Aaron in just a moment. But it's my opportunity and my pleasure to introduce our the next speaker, Jennifer Raitt, Executive Director at the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments, who in many ways has, for me, been a mentor in terms of fair housing, and is certainly a fair housing advocate and champion. Please join me in welcoming up Jenny Raitt.
Good afternoon. How is everybody? All right, lovely. You made it here. It was snowy, and we're all here in one piece. Nice to see everybody. And I love seeing the representation from across Greater Lowell. That's another beautiful thing to see, because this conversation is intentionally meant to be regional. We just heard a lot about Lowell, and we're obviously here in this absolutely gorgeous UTEC building. And the history in this building is phenomenal. Love it. Love Greg's leadership as well, and the stories that he conveyed to us about the populations they're serving, people who have really serious needs for housing. This conversation, just to orient us, and I have a longer presentation, so I'm definitely not going to use the time right now, but this, to orient you, we are not necessarily talking about affordable housing, we're talking about fair housing. And so as you're here today and you're listening, which I love that word, it means suspension of judgment, hopefully as well, and truly being active and engaged and hearing the stories of other people as they're communicating them, which could be very challenging stories that they might convey about their own experiences being unable to access affordable homes or any housing choice at all due to maybe discrimination, possibly the lack of housing, possibly the experience working with in a local community towards an opportunity. So there's a lot to listen to today, and I'm extremely grateful to be a co-host, or our organization is extremely grateful to be a co-host. I am not personally one, but to especially the effort to develop and evolve the Office of Fair Housing at the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. I'm so grateful also that the Affordable Homes Act, which was passed by our legislature, put this together, and also that they had the foresight to fund the trust fund as well. So we have the intellect, we have the people power, and we have the funding, and now we need the knowledge from all of you to make this work today. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Northern Middlesex Council of Governments when I come back, and why this is important in our region. But with that, I'm actually very honored to welcome Representative Anna Howard, who is going to now give remarks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Just briefly, thank you so much for having me here. Thank you for having us. And just like Jenny said, the Homes Affordability Act, we were so proud to pass that, to make that investment right here in the city of Lowell of $5 billion. And so, access to safe, affordable, and fair housing it shouldn't be a, shouldn't be discriminated against folks based on, just because based on their sex, their gender, the, the color of their skin, or their disability, or their military status, or, marriage status. It shouldn't be on that. It should always be, just like the title, fair housing. And so it's great to see this listening session where we bring everyone together. This is collective action, where we're here, when we listen, where all the voices are heard, to make sure that we all have access to safe and fair housing. Because all of us here, that is the number one I hear from constituents all the time when it comes to housing that's affordable and fair and safe. It is on everyone's mind and everyone's discussion every single day, especially right here in the city of Lowell, where it's one of the gateway cities, and it's a fifth largest city right here in Massachusetts of about 115,000 constituents. And so there's so much more to do. We need more housing, affordable, that's affordable to everyone, but fair and safe for all residents, and making sure we ensure that their rights are protected, that our tenants, our residents are protected, but also our landlords, our providers, that they know their rights and responsibilities, their roles and responsibility at the same time. So it's from both sides that we are here. I look forward to this listening session. I want to thank you to Director Whitney Demetrius from Fair Housing Office. Thank you to be here. I remember when you were appointed, we were so excited. And so that we're all here making sure that we all have access to fair housing. And that is the title. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Rep. Howard, and for your support of the office and all of the work as well that you've done. It's exciting to be in partnership with you. It's my opportunity now to introduce another champion of fair housing in this work, introduce to some and present to others, Rep. Rodney Elliott, please.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Whitney. Thank you to EOHLC. Thank you to Northern Middlesex Council of Government, CTI, UTEC for hosting this. You know, the Affordable Homes Act that I proudly voted for was a huge step to not only develop more housing that we knew was way behind. We were way behind the curve. But it also included opportunities to ensure that it was equitable. It was going to facilitate equity and fair housing by creating this office. You know, affordability is the number one issue in the Commonwealth. It's not any news to anyone, including myself and my colleagues. And housing is the number one contributor to that affordability. You know, I'm proud. You know, I remain on the Lowell Housing Authority even after I got elected. It's an unpaid position appointed by the governor. I remain on the Housing Authority because I see firsthand, I hear firsthand how housing decisions, how they translate into important real impacts on families. And each week, you know, we hear from families, from residents, can't get access, not only at the Housing Authority, but with their Section 8s, and being refused. You know, we have a waiting list at the Housing Authority of 6,000 people. 6,000 people, and we purge it because, as I think Jenny or Carl mentioned, people move on. They need housing. So I do believe, as a state rep, I believe meaningful housing reform starts by listening, by learning, by attending and hearing from the folks who know and are working and various agencies to let us know how we can make meaningful difference with residents, with advocates, and we need to hear those changes. You know, this conversation comes as a pivotal moment. I don't know if anyone maybe saw stories yesterday that the Senate is taking up, you know, their message yesterday was they're going to take up quote, a bold housing plan, housing bill moving forward, which, you know, makes some sense. The legislature, we're looking at process-based reforms to speed up housing productions. If you heard the governor the other night, we've created 100,000 units since she started taking office. That's a good start, but where do we go from there? And funding is in there. There's a $5.2 billion budget. You know, as a member of the Housing Authority, I was pleased to see that $2 billion was set aside to improve the conditions of the housing units that we have. We get very little money for capital improvements, right? And people shouldn't have to live in substandard housing. So I thought that was a critical element and investment that the governor has made into public housing authorities. So, you know, what we're here today is we can help shape the housing agenda. That will be bold, I believe, and it'll be practical and rooted in fairness so that communities like Lowell are places where people can come and live, they can come and work, and find affordable housing that is fair and equitable. So I look forward to continue to work with partners as we move forward on more housing legislations. And thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. And thank you, Whitney.
Okay, thank you so much, Rep. Elliott. I really appreciate those remarks and your leadership, partnership, and partnership in the work ahead. That being said, we're going to have, I'm just going to talk for a few more moments. We'll be hearing again from our co-hosts, and then we're going to jump into the listening session portion because we really want to be able to have opportunity to hear from you all. You know, my work really sits at the intersection of people and policy. And so, as I said, the secretary sort of encourages us at the Office of Housing and Livable Communities to lead with listening first. And so in starting this role, our intention is to really, as others have said, to help to shape the vision and the goals and the priorities of that said work. And that being said as well, at the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, we're sort of challenged with ourselves in thinking about what makes housing livable. Right? What makes housing livable? And so thinking about fair housing as the foundation for how we build communities, right? And so being intentional about having fair housing then at the forefront of our work. And so it has to do with whether a person can choose, right, opportunities of housing, choose where they want to live, choose to stay, choose to return. So these ideas more broadly around fair housing and making sure that folks have this ability to truly thrive in communities, understanding that housing then becomes a foundation for other opportunities, right? Jobs and economic development and healthcare and access to healthy foods and transportation. And so really thinking thoughtfully around with how that work looks. And, you know, really thinking about the fact that housing is not just about units, right? It's about homes. It's not just about policy. It's really about how do we build trust? How do we build and create more access and dignity for individuals and families to be able to thrive in communities and communities that are welcoming, right? So what does that also mean? That's part of the vision of our work as well, right? What does it not mean to be able to live in a community, but also to be able to truly feel safe as well as you, in terms of that as well. So, you know, we understand that here in Greater Lowell, there are different challenges, and part of our goal in going out across the state is understanding that each region is unique, each community is unique. And so how we frame our work has to be hearing from those unique voices and helping that shape our priorities. So again, we're deeply thankful to our co-hosts who help us to be able to pull this all together. And I wanted to kind of just go through as well, again, thinking about our work in terms of all 351 cities and towns, right? And so while we're on tour here, being in community with folks, it's really to make sure that we are prioritizing our work in terms of eliminating housing discrimination, promoting open and welcoming communities across the state. So really having a holistic approach to how we address housing issues as well. As Jenny mentioned, and others, it came out of the Affordable Homes Act, right? And so the Hill Driscoll administration had sort of the foresight, as folks have said, to ensure that the Office of Fair Housing and the Fair Housing Trust Fund was included in that. So we're thankful to our legislators and leaders for supporting that effort. Our goal really is to work to proactively advance fair housing across the state, to promote open and welcome communities, to eliminate housing discrimination, and support the work that you all are doing on the ground, hearing from you, how we shape that well, how we do that well, and as I said, really thinking about this holistically in terms of it not just being about fair housing, but thinking about how our work at the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities interacts with the office around transportation, around climate, right, around all of these various entities. And so, as folks said, you know, it's also important to have policy. It's also great to have funding connected to that policy, right? And so the Fair Housing Trust Fund was also part of the Affordable Homes Act as it was created. And then more recently in the fiscal 25 budget, the governor put $1 million in the Fair Housing Trust Fund. And those dollars are the purpose of those dollars is to support, as others have said, the work on the ground, right? We're hearing from you the challenges, we're hearing from you the opportunities, we're hearing from you the things that are happening on the ground, and what we then prioritize in that funding should hopefully align well with what we're hearing in terms of addressing those issues, right? So the idea is to promote access to housing choice and opportunity, to enhance education, both for residents as well as for housing providers around fair housing laws, and to fund initiatives on the ground, right, to address these issues from a systemic perspective as well. So we imagine that we'll hear from many folks and get applications. The request for proposals will be out soon. So we're eager to hear from folks around the work that would happen out of those dollars. So we're really excited and also thankful for many of you in this room who also advocated for those dollars to happen. So when we think about what fair housing is, as Rep. Hong has mentioned, it's about ensuring that you're not discriminated against based off these protected classes. And here in Massachusetts, we are ever more committed to fair housing and ensuring that everyone has the right to live where they want, free from housing discrimination. And so everyone is a member of a protected class, right? And so you think about again, whether or not you are able to access the housing based off your race, your color, your national origin, your sex, religion, military status, marital status, age, ancestry, everyone is a member of a protected class. And so the work that our partners do and that we do here at the state ensures that folks know where to file a complaint. Folks know their rights, right? And also that we can address these issues systemically. So these sessions are really about engaging with you all, and as others have said, and I won't belabor the point, but it's important that we hear from you. We appreciate in advance your transparency and your willingness to share. It is my responsibility, I feel, in this role to ensure that what we're hearing, really you'll be able to hear back that we've heard you, right? The active listening, as others have said, and be able to see that shaping the vision of our work and our built collaboration. So, and that being said, I'm going to pause because I want to give the floor to our partners at Community Teamwork. And as Carl has indicated, the work that Aaron has done as the Fair Housing Coordinator there has been amazing. I want to give opportunity to hear from him as well as a person he works with more closely. I believe Destiny is going to share with us as well, so I'm excited for that. That being said, please join me in welcoming Aaron Greensburg.
All right, thank you, folks. Thank you, everybody, for coming in your residential and official capacities. Thank you, Carl, for introducing us in this program. I always like hearing the origin story when Carl tells it. He looks around and says, there's no discrimination in Lowell because there's nowhere to report it. And that was very real, and that's the reason I'm at CTI, because it was the application for those grants that started this program 4.5 years ago. And I'm happy to say we do have numbers now, so we can have a more sophisticated discussion about what housing discrimination looks like in Lowell. These are important things to track, as well as just providing that basic assistance. You know, when I approach fair housing as an idea, I really think about it in two separate camps. We have this sort of discrimination that happens with the individual landlord, tenant, or home buyer or home seller relationship. And then you also have this sort of separate section of our historic patterns of discrimination in land use and the inequities and wealth that have developed with our families as a result of that, and how do we fix that? Today, you're going to get me talking mostly on that individual housing discrimination, what is prohibited conduct stuff, and Jenny's going to come back up and give you some more of the land use stuff that we're talking about. When I think about any civil rights, I start by thinking, you know, whether it's in employment or public accommodations or housing, what's the easy test to know that you're thinking about discrimination in the right way? And I think of it as a three-part test. You belong to a protected class, as Whitney mentioned. We all belong to probably half a dozen different ones. There's some sort of harm or unfair or unequal treatment, and then they're connected together, right? That unfair treatment is really motivated by the person's protected class status. And we've got some similar materials. I won't overlap, but I will highlight a couple here. The source of income protections, which we've talked about in Massachusetts and other speakers have mentioned, this idea that you can't treat somebody differently because they use a subsidy or want to participate in RAFT or some other program. It has an extremely high rate of discrimination. And it is an area we need to spend a lot of time. It is really reducing a lot of opportunities for folks. The other one I would highlight is disability. Nationally, over half of the housing discrimination complaints that are filed are on the basis of disability. And some of those disability protections are a little bit unique compared to the other protected classes and can also be a little bit more complicated. So the more we know about it, really, the better off we are. In general, so we know what a protected class is. We know it's a housing provider, somebody that's in the business of housing that is going to be doing that prohibited conduct or that discrimination. But what is prohibited? Refusal to rent or sell and terms and conditions. Am I getting a criminal history screening for you but not the other person? Am I being offered different lending products based on my status? That's different terms and conditions. Otherwise make unavailable. I think of this as like an umbrella that it includes skipping over somebody's name on an applicant list because it's identifiably ethnic. It includes terminations if it's based on a protected class, right? When a tenancy terminates or when a lender decides to foreclose or back out of an agreement. And then we've got this one on the bottom, which we keep getting back to disability discrimination because it's so prevalent. These are some unique protections for folks with disabilities to be able to ask for changes to policies or changes to their physical space so they can use the housing that's available. So CTI covers about 70 different communities, and this is where we have received as a program complaints about housing rights issues. It's a little misleading. It is really focused, way over half of what we get is Lowell, Lawrence, and Salem. And that makes sense. They're our largest cities. They have the largest populations, and they also have the largest populations of minority folks and people that check off more of the protected class boxes. This map up here shows two different patterns. It's got a fair housing pattern, what we're talking about today, housing discrimination based on protected class status, and it also has tenant rights issues. And we're not here to talk about tenant rights, but I do want to make sure that we're all thinking about them as two separate things for when we do our breakout sessions. A tenant right is what you get just for being a resident in Massachusetts. It is what is safe and sanitary if you're a renter. It is how your security deposit's held or how a lease is terminated. Our fair housing rights, again, are our civil rights in housing. What you see here is a really big overlap in where we get complaints. And overwhelmingly, our folks that come in asking for help are giving us civil rights problems along with tenant rights problems. And they both have their place at the table. Maybe not today for this one, but something we should be thinking of in the background. So here are some of the numbers that we've collected over the last 4 years. We've had about 1,000 people come through our fair housing program. I think 700 or 800 of them have alleged civil rights issues, fair housing issues, and the other group were sort of purely tenant rights. Consistent with our national averages, disability discrimination is about half of the fair housing issues that we see in our program. Receipt of public assistance is next up on that list. I think we're skewed here because of our proximity to our leased housing department at CTI. We get a lot of clients that are already participating in a subsidy program through CTI. But really, Suffolk did a study 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and north of 80% of people that try and rent with the subsidy are turned away because they are using the subsidy. So that number is maybe high on our national list where it's not a protected class. Domestic violence is not a protected class. It overlaps a lot with protected class status because overwhelmingly it's women that are survivors of domestic violence. HUD started tracking this separately, so we track it separately also and think about it as how you assert your specific protections for domestic violence in housing. After you sort of take those top 3 groups out, if you had controlled and pulled out source of income and domestic violence, you'd see pretty consistently from year to year for us, family status, race, color, religion are coming in around like 12 to 15% for us. I'm not sure how that fits nationally, but that's been really consistent in our program. When we look at When we look at the big legal issues here, reasonable accommodations and modifications are the biggest one, and then otherwise make unavailable is next because it really covers all those terminations that happen based on prohibited conduct. So before I introduce the next speaker, I just want to talk a little bit about what a reasonable accommodation is. If you have an impairment that affects the way you live your life and your major activities, you can ask for a change to a policy or procedure or a change to that physical space so you can use your housing. The really salient examples that I come up with regularly are someone uses an assistance animal and they want to live in a condo association or an apartment building that has a no pets policy. You ask for a change to that policy to allow you to have your assistance animal. If you're living in a space with a free-for-all parking lot, it could be asking for preferential parking for a mobility impairment, so you can have a larger space or a space closer to the entrance. And these areas, we spend a lot of time, anybody in the fair housing world is spending a lot of time on these issues. I get to introduce our next speaker, Destiny Maxim. She was a client in our fair housing program and has a great success story around being able to use this reasonable accommodation request and process to maintain that housing stability that really lets us do everything else. So Destiny, come on up.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak today, Erin. I'm truly grateful to be here and to share my experience. When we talk about disability and fair housing, we often focus on policies, regulations, and compliance. These things do matter deeply, but for disabled people, fair housing is also personal. It is about whether our homes allow us to live safely, with dignity, and with the people that we love. I want to share my story as a success and also as an example of what becomes possible when systems listen and work together. So obviously I am a wheelchair user and I'm someone who also relies on a housing subsidy as well as the HCBS waiver service to live independently in the community. Before I had access to community-based housing, I did live in a nursing home for over 5 years because there were no accessible housing options available to me. This waiver made it possible for me to leave institutional care. But living in the community requires more than just placement. It requires the right supports. and the right housing. Today, I work full-time as a disabled advocate. I am married, and my home is where I receive care, but it's also where I manage chronic medical conditions, store medical supplies, work, and live my daily life. Recently, I needed a reasonable accommodation request. My husband and I were living together in a studio apartment. For 2 people, one of whom uses a wheelchair and requires extensive medical equipment and supplies, this space was no longer workable. Over time, the lack of space became a real barrier to my safety and independence. In addition, my husband is autistic and experiences significant noise sensitivity. To be honest, we had a neighbor whose noise made this space unlivable for him. That kind of constant sensory input doesn't fade into the background, it just builds. And when housing does not account for sensory needs, stability quietly slips away, even when everything looks all right on paper. Together, these factors made it clear that our unit no longer met our disability-related needs. So a reasonable accommodation, as we just heard, and I'm going to say it again, is a legally protected request that allows a disabled person equal access to housing. This involves a change to a rule, policy, practice, or service when that change is necessary because of disability. What's important to note, it is not a preference or a special request. It's about equity and access. When we submitted a reasonable accommodation request, we requested it to move my housing subsidy to a different unit within the same development. In my case, this accommodation request involved multiple agencies: Appleton Mills, which was my landlord, CTI, which is the organization administering my subsidy program, and EOHLC, which is the state agency responsible for the MRVP voucher program. Each played an important role, but as is often the case in complex systems, coordination and communication were key. I will be honest, I could not navigate this process entirely on my own. After struggling and receiving multiple denials, I reached out to CTI's Fair Housing Program to help frame the request both cleanly and in a way that reflected both the legal standards and my lived reality. With CTI's help, my reasonable accommodation was articulated in a way that fully captured the need. At the same time, this also required parallel persistence on my end. I was following up, staying engaged, continuing to advocate. But once this accommodation was clearly understood by all agencies and heard, the response was thoughtful and it was timely. The agencies involved finally began working together, and the request was accepted. The process moved very quickly and collaboratively after that. Within less than 1 month, I was able to move into a new unit that met my access needs. This space now allows room for my wheelchair, my medical supplies, and the daily care that supports my independence. It also provides a quieter, more stable environment that supports my husband's sensory needs. This outcome matters because it shows what fair housing can look like when the systems work as they are intended to do. This experience taught me something else that's important. Reasonable accommodations are not just about rules, they're about listening. They're about understanding disability in its full context, and they are about collaboration across systems. My story is a success because people listened, because agencies communicated, and because the system ultimately and eventually responded with care and urgency. But it is also a reminder that community living is only possible when housing, services, and policy all work together. I share this story today with gratitude and hope, and gratitude for the outcome that my family experienced, and hope that this example can inform how we can continue to strengthen fair housing practices for disabled people moving forward. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the work that you do every day, and thank you for continuing to build systems that support access, dignity, and stability for disabled people and their families.
Wow, can we give her another round of applause? We love to hear those successful stories uplifted, and community teamwork is truly a catalyst for change. And as you said, when systems work together, when we listen, and also to your point, Destiny, around your parallel persistence, right, and knowing your rights as well. Love and appreciate your courage for being able to share and uplift your story. It is my pleasure now to welcome back up Jenny Raitt, Executive Director for MCOG.
All right. So just quickly, first of all, I want to thank my staff, Chris Hayes, Christian D'Amelia, and Mike Ashola, who is also here, and also some of my council members who are also in the audience, including Dina Favreau from the town of Billerica, and also Evan Belansky, who's the Community Development Director in the town of Chelmsford. Thank you all again for showing up this afternoon. So a little bit about NIMCOG. We are one of the regional planning agencies. There's one of 13 agencies that are across the Commonwealth. We serve the 9 communities that are on the screen, and we work to foster regional collaboration and coordination, working primarily in land use, housing, economic development, transportation, the environment, and more. We're governed by an 18-member council, and we just recently, actually a year ago, adopted our first strategic plan, which is a 3-year plan that helps to provide our agency with direction. My goal is to quickly share with you so that you can move into conversation, understanding and responding to the region's fair housing challenges. I absolutely cannot get into a long training about the challenges and barriers of land use and zoning, though I would love to. You may not want that. But I did publish a piece in January of 2022 through the American Planning Association called Ending Zoning's Racist Legacy. And it does provide a good overview of this particular topic on fair housing, and also provides information about ways that communities across the country have worked to address this issue. Housing discrimination persists across Greater Lowell, and the way that our agency talks about it is in a variety of different ways. We work with our communities to work on improved housing plans, potentially good, strong master plans and comprehensive plans, to also better understand the impact that their zoning decisions have on outcomes. Will it actually create housing? Will it actually create opportunity? And then also a lot of training and education that we try to achieve with each of our communities. And by that, I mean, we primarily serve our local municipal governments, though we are many times people who attend our community meetings, and when we're working on a local plan, they're not just members from the local community's government, but there are many people throughout the community who we're working to reach and have participate in those planning processes. However, as noted by many prior speakers, this is a systemic issue, and systems work hard to continue being the system that they were designed to be. So therefore, they're very challenging to break down and sometimes break up and change. So the reason housing discrimination persists is from the perspective of land use and zoning, and we've just heard about why it persists, because sometimes there's not an avenue to report things. Sometimes people aren't well educated about what actually is something to complain about, and more. This is about the land use decisions that happen in our local communities. And those decisions have produced disparate impacts and contributed to rising costs for both people who are working to purchase a home and rent a home. And there continues to be long-standing structural barriers in accessing homeownership opportunities. And this has been outlined by many others across the Commonwealth, but particularly it's acute in gateway cities like the city of Lowell, but it also shows up in other parts of our region. And that also has a cascading impact on people who are looking to rent homes. And our current data reveals many fair housing concerns. I think you just got a great understanding of the basics of fair housing and what it means, how it does touch everybody who's in this room right now, and more. And it shows up in different ways. And these are just some maps that illustrate some of the challenges of populations of people of color or Hispanic or Latino in percentage of housing units, which are currently renter occupied by census tracts across our region. And you can see that in some cases there's no representation or very little, and some it's quite dominant. And similarly, discrimination complaints creates sometimes displacement pressures, meaning that there are complaints by various categories, as illustrated here on the screen in the chart to your left, that indicates, as we heard, people's complaints related to disability and lack of access to opportunities or options, or because of their disability, unable to access housing options. There are many complaints in that category, as well as many more that are noted here on the screen, as well as leading to eviction filing rates that have gone up, and that in our region is actually higher than the state average, as well as foreclosure petitions, meaning people who are potentially on the verge of losing their home. And also looking at other data which helps people to access homes is mortgage. How can you access a mortgage? Can you follow through with a mortgage application? Or are you denied? And if you're denied, who's getting denials? And so this just illustrates this is a little thumbnail of a very large data set of many other ways that you can sort the data, but denial rates by race as well as by ethnicity, illustrating again that predominantly those denials happen for people of color way more than people who are white. And so our agency is working, as I noted, we work directly with our local communities to work on solid plans that help to address these issues by getting ahead of them. And one of the ways that we can get ahead of them is producing more housing opportunities and many different diverse types of housing. And also educating our local officials about good decision making, what is a proper way to run public meetings, understanding how people are speaking at public meetings that may influence outcomes that are not productive towards actually creating homes. And so one of the mechanisms that we're working on right now is through a regional housing strategy called At Home in Greater Lowell and led by Chris Hayes, who is the Director of Housing and Economic Development. This 10-year regional housing strategy, the goals and strategies have been endorsed by our council, and we are in the process of now working on the second phase of this strategy. And we, as part of that strategy, have a fair housing goal. And we've heard a lot about fair housing, but another way of talking about it is to affirmatively further it, meaning we want to have and increase fair housing opportunity in every neighborhood across our region. And that means expansion of access, improved understanding, and building trust. And some of the strategies to get there include a storytelling program, a training program, and continued support, and likely in partnership with the wonderful community teamwork advocates here to help tenants and landlords understand their responsibilities and rights. So what's next is, as I noted, we're in the process of implementation, and we do have a storytelling component happening right now, and ability for you to tell your story through that process. If you want to know more about that, you can contact me or any of my team. We also are working to build a housing data dashboard, and there's a working group that is overseen by Christian D'Amelia, who's the regional housing coordinator. And we're also looking to develop a housing supply accelerator, as that is one of the solutions to enabling fair housing choice. So with that, I say thank you very much. And Jennifer Reid again, Executive Director of NIMCOG. Thanks so much, Whitney.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you for your work across the region, affirmatively furthering fair housing. So important, right? Putting fair housing at the forefront of our planning and doing that proactively.